Some games you just know are going to stand the test of time, being released and re-released multiple times over the years. Meanwhile, there are other games that, for whatever reason, usually fun licensing stuff, will never ever 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 officially be released again. I'm Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, and I would be absolutely fuming if some of these games came back. Absolutely fuming. Reverse Psychology Master. Oh, fuming. Wink. Perhaps the most well-covered game here, so let's basically get out of the way nice and early. PT is now considered an infamous piece of delisted and lost-ish media, with people buying and selling PS4s that came loaded with the game for ludicrous prices just because the game had been removed from the PlayStation Store. And in an especially bitter bit of bitterness, Konami would make it so that you couldn't even re-download the game if you'd uninstalled it from your PS4, which is, bit mean. A playable teaser for Silent Hills, the now cancelled Silent Hill reboot that would have seen Hideo Kojima collaborating with Norman Reedus and Guillermo del Toro. PT basically boiled down to walking through the same couple of rooms and corridors over and over again, solving the occasional puzzle and then being jump scared by a weird zombie lady. But PT's method of developing tension and atmosphere was unmatched in the horror gaming space, and really, it hasn't been matched since. PT's huge success and cultural impact catapulted Silent Hills into becoming one of the most anticipated games of the moment. But in 2015, Kojima and Konami's feud would boil over into the public sphere. Konami would cancel Silent Hills and attempt to remove Kojima's name from the upcoming Metal Gear Solid 5. Kojima would leave Konami to start his own studio, and PT would be delisted entirely, leading to the great gold rush of people buying second-hand PS4s. Now, PT is long gone, but that hasn't stopped a wave of indie developers and fans from creating their own takes on the formula, some of which have been decently successful, like Madison and Visage. Either way though, removing a game digitally and making preservation for it a nightmare because you're in a bit of a beef is remarkably stubborn and a bit shit. To be frank, it should be punished. Okay, maybe that's a bit far, but Punisher time!
Or shoot me.
Dispensing justice and dealing with criminals in a more permanent way than most heroes, Frank Castle is to the bad guys what Doom Guy is to the forces of hell. He rip, he tear, he care not about knife safety. While Marvel games in today's landscape still like to dabble in more adult themes and situations, games like Spider-Man or Midnight Suns don't go to the extreme lengths that Castle did for his banger 6th generation game. Maybe if Peter had chucked Craven into a wood chipper, he would have had an easier time of it in the second game, eh? We're never going to see a game like Volition's The Punisher from 2005 ever again, and that's without getting into the fact that Volition ended up being shut down by the Embracer Group, who must surely have some kind of kink for closing down studios at this point. A pseudo-sequel to the 2004 film that I am always going to have a very soft spot for, with Thomas Jane returning as Castle, the Punisher sees Frankie Boy in New York murdering his way through all of the criminal groups he can find. While the game itself is a pretty standard third-person shooter in terms of mechanics, the level of gore when it comes to the executions and interrogation scenes was pretty graphic and controversial for its time. Nowadays, we probably wouldn't blink at the Punisher's violence, especially when Mortal Kombat is as graphic as it is, but we know for almost a fact that Disney isn't signing off on a port of this at the very least, when it's A, this notoriously violent, and B, gonna clash with their current plans for the character. That might be why Thomas Jane never got his gratuitous cameo in Deadpool vs Wolverine, Elektra, but no Punisher. But I digress. You normally don't think of Nintendo when you're talking about the Metal Gear Solid series, so the fact that the GameCube boasts an exclusive remake of the first Metal Gear Solid is pretty wild. The fact that it also wasn't developed by Hideo Kojima is even more wild, with Hideo deep in development on Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater at the time. It was alright, that game. Pretty alright. Yeah, decent. Instead, the decision was made to have Silicon Knights develop this remake, with Kojima taking on a supervisory producer role, while writer and director Ryuhei Kitamura would provide some of his talent for some new, almost wonderfully ridiculous cutscenes for the game. Twin Snakes would even feature some gameplay mechanics and abilities that were only added in MGS2, and while it does kinda break the game completely, it does make this version of MGS1 disappearing entirely all the more sad. Whether due to Silicon Knights' eventual implosion or some kind of licensing rights between Konami and Nintendo, Twin Snakes never made it to another console, which is a damn shame. And now that Konami and Kojima have split, and with Silicon Knights basically spiting their way to an early grave, the chances of it ever happening are basically zero. It'd make for a good addition to the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection as an alternative version for MGS1, but between the rights issues, personal issues, and how it seems to get less liked by fans as time goes on, it's just not really on the cards. Let's just be happy we might finally see MGS4 get ported and Amscray out of here for a wild wing ding at the Cyclotron instead.
Mark will clean this mess up later.
One of the best licensed games of all time, The Simpsons Hit and Run took a well-loved franchise and decided to have a bit of fun with it. A shameless copy of the Grand Theft Auto formula,
Which was the style at the time?
albeit without the rampant violence as people just flail around like Magikarp instead of exploding in crimson. Hit and Run saw TV's most recognisable family trying to solve a conspiracy that would affect the entirety of Springfield. What's with all the flying robotic wasps, or the new brand of Buzz Cola that's causing people to act loopy? How do the dastardly Kang and Kodos fall into this? The only way to find out is by driving around at high speed and occasionally solving some platforming challenges, apparently. We're probably not selling this game as well as Abe Simpson sells sex juice, but it's among gaming royalty for a reason. It's some good old-fashioned fun. With 7 chapters, each with their own playable character, missions, references, and collectibles to find, along with full voice acting from the Simpsons cast, Hit and Run was the perfect game for fans of the series. While we've mentioned in the past about how the presence of Apu in the game might give some cause for concern about re-releasing or even remaking Hit and Run, there's also the very real likelihood that the cast is getting a bit too old to really commit to an extra project like this, even just a remaster. We're talking thousands of additional lines of dialogue and plenty more hours in the booth for something that just isn't going to land the same way as it did 20 years ago. Full credit to the Simpsons voice cast for going as long as they have, but their age is unfortunately showing at this point. Listening to Marge now just makes me feel very sad. Add in just how expensive it will be to hire them and it doesn't add up. It also doesn't add up how hard it is to make a good Godzilla game. So yeah, there haven't been many decent games that allow you to play as the big radioactive lizard, have there? Apparently, being an all-powerful being and destroying cities with ease doesn't lend itself to good video games, which seems completely stupid. Godzilla for the PS4 launched in 2014/15, coinciding with the release of the West's second cinematic attempt at adapting Godzilla. Even if it didn't have Jean Reno in it, that second attempt was probably much better, and the airport scene will live in my mind rent-free forever. But you can't really say the quality extended to the PS4 game. Maybe that's because A, it was also a PS3 release, or B, the more likely scenario is because these kaiju had all of the grace of a reversing dump truck without any tyres on. The premise was pretty simple, with players controlling either Godzilla himself or one of the various monsters throughout the franchise's history, depending on the mode, rampaging through the city and taking out the human military forces trying to bring you down. Sometimes a rival kaiju would also appear, leading to a scrap between the two while the military just watches on in helpless horror. The spectacle on display and genuine love shown for the source material is impressive, even if playing the game will change how you feel about generators on a fundamental level.
Godzilla is approaching the generator.
Bad quality aside, it's still a little bit heartbreaking that Godzilla was delisted just 2 years after it launched. Whether due to poor sales or the weak critical reception, Godzilla for the PS4 was left to die and delisted by 2017, and we're never seeing a new version of it ever again. We're also not seeing the sense in paying £200+ for a second-hand copy, as it's also one of the most expensive games across the whole PS4 saga? What's the saga? It's Panzer Dragoon Saga. You can't even play it. From one expensive arse video game to another, Panzer Dragoon Saga is one of the greatest games of all time, a real needle mover in the early 3D gaming sphere that absolutely laid many paths for other iconic games to walk along. That's according to all 25 people who played it on the Saturn in 1998 anyway. Okay, all 25,000 or so. Playing as Edge, you're trying to cope with your quest for revenge against the Black Fleet, a dangerous group that killed his friends and nicked a girl from a wall. I hate when they do that, but at least you have a cool dragon to fly around on. One of the most overlooked RPGs of all time, Panzer Dragoon Saga had an absolute ton of ideas and flourishes that wouldn't become commonplace until the next generation of gaming. Sega was plenty ambitious with Saga, with tons of awesome voice acting, some great full 3D visuals, and plenty of kinda wild semi-turn-based battles atop dragons where timing is key, as well as a nice bit of free roaming across the sizable world of the continent. There really aren't enough games that let you ride around on dragons, but much like how something like Drakengard on PS2 or Lair on PS3 never really set sales charts alight, Panzer Dragoon Saga never really made too much of an impression over here. Releasing at the tail end of the Saturn's life, roughly only 25,000 or so copies were produced for the West, and the game's sales obviously suffered. Your wallet is going to suffer if you want to buy it these days, so if you do want to play Panzer Dragoon Saga, you better check in with that emu who is always late. That late emu. Cough. Due to that lack of success, its developer disbanding shortly after its release, and the belief that Sega has apparently, maybe, possibly lost the source code, a straight port of Panzer Dragoon Saga is highly unlikely, and a remake is probably just going to be too costly. It's always going to be a little bit underground. Now, if it were up to us, we'd never see Tony Hawk's Underground 1 and or 2 ever again, purely because we don't want to see Eric Sparrow's big dumb stupid face ever again. That was our muck twist over the helicopter, you fucking Malcolm in the Middle looking fucking asshole. While Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 was the first big evolution for the series, giving players the ability to freely roam around levels and accept goals at their own pace, Tony Hawk's Underground took that approach one step further. It gave players a full-blown story of a rookie skater from New Jersey looking to go pro and his head best mate Eric. You could also get off your skateboard to approach levels in a completely different way, climbing to new spots or trying to extend a combo by sprinting to the nearest grind rail. Underground 2 built on that premise, offering more of the same albeit in more exotic locations and with goals that definitely felt lifted from Jackass. That Jackass relation is probably why you'll never see Underground 2 again at the very least, as the Activision of today is probably going to be gun-shy about re-releasing a game featuring the Jackass cast and a lot of humour that would get a lot of people mad today. As for Underground 1, while Tony Hawk himself and Activision seem to be feeling positive about the future of the series, it's clear from the remake of the first two games that the series is about recreating the nostalgia of the Pro Skater series, rather than revisiting the ideas of Underground or even American Wasteland. Plus, and this makes me question why they're so positive about a new game, who's going to make it after Vicarious Visions was absorbed into Activision? I'm pretty sure we've seen the final Tony Hawk game in general, despite what the man himself says. I don't know, I just have a gut feeling.
Of SOS. It's very garbled, but we've detected it's coming from near you. Maybe there are some civilians trapped. Investigate and do what you can to help.
It's clear that we're never getting a game like C12 Final Resistance again. A Sony published game about an alien invasion? We had that series on PS3. It was just called Resistance, and that actually successful series hasn't been seen for over a decade. What chance do you think an obscure PS1 game will have of making a second appearance? The weak reviews also mean C12 probably isn't going to be the first in line for a port to the PlayStation Plus Classics collection anytime soon, which is going to be disappointing news for me, and pretty much only me, I'm pretty sure. Even the team behind this game, who were also originally responsible for Medieval, were shut down a few years back. For those who don't know what C12 Final Resistance is all about, sit down, you're ready to hear about a legend, which will be most of you considering this PS1 game didn't get a North American release until 2002. You control Lieutenant Riley Vaughn, a cybernetically enhanced human soldier who's basically the last bastion of hope against the might of a full-blown alien invasion. As the invasion intensifies, you'll upgrade your weapons and abilities, but maybe lose something of your humanity along the way in the process. By no means is C12 one of the classics of the PS1, as much as my 12-year-old brain wants me to think otherwise, but if you're looking for an old-school single-player shooter that might remind you of Terminator meets Siphon Filter, you can certainly do a lot worse than sailing the Seven Seas to play this in whatever dimension you can. Starting with the PS1 Spider-Man games, the webhead was a huge part of Activision's portfolio in the 2000s, including some pretty fantastic games like the movie tie-in to Spider-Man 2, which pioneered the more realistic swinging mechanics that have become a staple of the series, or Spider-Man Web of Shadows, which gave players what they really wanted. More black cats. Oh no, don't beat me up. Anyway, we're partial to Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which may have ditched the free roaming aspect but offered a very stylized take on the Spider-Man mythos and a compelling beat-em-up. A game that went on to inspire Spider-Verse, Shattered Dimensions sees 4 different versions of the web crawler all working together to stop Mysterio from obliterating the entire universe. Because Activision lost the Marvel license in the 2010s, all of their Marvel games, including Spider-Man, Ultimate Alliance and their X-Men games, were nuked from digital storefronts, and while there's rumours that Xbox and Activision might be working on relisting the Transformers games, along with Deadpool and the Ultimate Alliance series, Spider-Man has basically become a Sony character at this point. Also, re-releasing these classic Spider-Man games could lead to some Spider-Man saturation, with the already ongoing Insomniac game series, the Spider-Verse movies and comics, and whatever MCU project is next, and probably dozens more of other Spider-Man stuff. While it would be great to see Shattered Dimensions or even Edge of Time, Black Cat Punch Me in the Throat become available again, it's just not happening. Beanox are deep in the Call of Duty Warzone mines right now, and games like Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time would need some decent work to improve their performance issues, and is it really worth the effort for them when they could just put, I don't know, Vanilla Ice in Warzone and like quadruple their money? Probably not. If you want to talk about a game that seemingly no one has a bad word for, it's Blur. Developed by Bizarre Creations, the Liverpool-based gaming outfit responsible for the Project Gotham racing series, Geometry Wars, and the whipper of a third-person shooter that was The Club, Blur is a slight departure from their usual fare. While it's still a racing game, Project Gotham Racing played like a slightly more arcadey take on Gran Turismo or Forza Motorsport, rewarding drifting and other stunt-like driving, but Blur was basically Mario Kart in a Ford GT. Licensed cars, real-life locations, and a bunch of power-ups that allow players to cause carnage on the racetrack help make Blur one of the most incredibly fun racing games on the PS3 and Xbox 360. Unfortunately, due to the commercial failure of Blur and the relatively lukewarm response to the other Bizarre Creations game from 2010, the James Bond-fronted Bloodstone, owners Activision announced that the company would be shut down. While they did commission a mobile game developer to create a pretty awful mobile spin-off,
Which was the style at the time?
it'd be the last we'd see of the Blur name pretty much ever again. These days, you'd be hard-pressed to find a game like Blur knocking about. A big-budget racing game with licensed cars that you can crash and destroy? For whatever boring corporate reason, licensed cars and destruction just don't seem to mix, as games like Burnout, Wreckfest, and BeamNG, which port destruction front and center, use original car designs inspired by real-life models instead of licensing them. Because of this, and because Activision just aren't going to do anything with the series ever again, Blur is going to be left in the memories of all the people, a relatively small amount of people. And that was our video looking at some video games that will never come back, and I'd be really annoyed if they did. Super annoyed. Did you have any recommendations for games that should come back but you don't think they will? Let me know down in the comments down below. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thank you for watching. I'm gonna get it. Oh, I missed. There you go. Watching.